good afternoon to everyone out there. I hope that you can hear me. My name is Jessica Massey, and I'm a digital and financial literacy specialist for UNCDF, and I'm coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda. So it's a bit dark for me here still, but I'm very glad to welcome all of you to our webinar on measuring digital and financial literacy in Pacific Island countries with a specific focus on the case of Samoa. We're here today basically to go over the case of Samoa with our UNCDF Digital and Financial Literacy Survey, which the panelists will describe in more detail. But this was completed in 7 countries in the Pacific over the past few years. And basically, the point of it is to really understand where we currently are in terms of digital and financial literacy in a number of key indexed areas using a simple tool, a simple and cost-effective tool. And this survey, it was developed under a couple of different programs. One was called the Pacific Digital Economy Program, or PDEP, and the other is Digital Financial Services for Resilience, or DFS for RES. And these 2 programs are meant to strengthen the state of digital finance. And this particular focus, well, UNCDF works in LDCs to deploy new capital mechanisms and to be a support in terms of bringing finance to places that have traditionally been overlooked. These are the survey particularly today that we're talking about is in the Pacific region. And we're grateful to the European Union, who's here with us today, OACPS, the Australian government, and the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade aid program that were instrumental in championing and funding this survey. So basically, I think I will let the panelists talk, I think, a bit more deeply about this, and we will be watching the Q&A section as we go. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section, and myself and some of my colleagues from communications will be watching it. But I'll just do a quick naming of our panelists and our special guest speaker for today. But I'll do a full introduction afterwards. So today we're here with Dr. Eriascola, who's the deputy head of the delegation for the European Union for the Pacific. I'll give a full introduction in a moment. We're here with Mr. Mohammed Ali Akram, who's our senior financial sector specialist in the UNCDF Pacific program, with Zaituna Mustafa Abdi, and she's our country coordinator for UNCDF in Samoa. With Lana Lome Eremia, who's the manager for financial system development at the Central Bank of Samoa, and with Ms. Kaz Tabut, who's the owner and of Tabut Research, which is the firm that was instrumental in the survey here. So I think what we'll do first, try to keep it so that I can see the page, is I'd like to welcome Dr. Ascola from the European Union to give our opening remarks. And I will just give a quick introduction. Dr. Ascola is the deputy head of the delegation for the European Union, and She has substantial experience in terms of the EU's trade relations and negotiations in Africa, in the Caribbean, and with the Pacific. Before she joined the delegation, and she's based in Fiji, she had senior functions with the European Commission in Brussels, where she was the co-chair of the Trade Committee for the African, Caribbean, and Pacific EPA partners. I'll let her give a little bit more information about herself, but we would like to really welcome you. And I will mute myself and be looking at the chat, but welcome, and please take over the floor. And actually, one second. Let me figure out how to unmute you. Can I have some technical assistance quickly to unmute?
She is unmuted. I think there's something wrong with her mic.
Yes, I think that there may be an issue with the microphone. So just wait one second because we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Loud
Yes.
and clear. Yes. All right, excellent. It was on my side then the problem of connection or microphone. Indeed, there was a problem of a setting. Well, anyway, thank you very much for passing me the floor and giving me the opportunity to give some opening remarks in this very interesting webinar. So, dear UNCDF representatives, invited guests, participants, and stakeholders joining us from different parts of the Pacific and perhaps even elsewhere. I am very pleased to join you in this on behalf of the European Union. The webinar, which concerns something very timely at the moment, measuring digital and financial literacy in Pacific Island countries. And the case is specifically Samoa this time. There are over 6 billion smartphone users in the world, and over 90% of the global population has access to the internet, which is very good indeed, because that is quite a coverage. Almost everybody has access to internet. Today, clearly, more and more daily functions have transferred to the digital space, and almost all financial transactions and products are offered online. And I believe that we have all had to adjust our working methods and our everyday life to the modern realities and means of communication, messaging, planning, and financial transactions as well. And of course, all this requires lots of skills and it requires a lot of knowledge on digital means of of communication, not only on how to use them, but also how to stay safe in the cyberspace. Clearly, the ongoing digital transformation of the global economy, it provides lots of opportunities, also here in the Pacific, including increased participation in global e-trade and digitally connected domestic markets. At the same time, however, increasing digitalization exposes us to new risks, including even frauds and thefts and so on. So cybersecurity is more important than ever in this new environment. And all this is why we need to be well equipped on digital financial literacy. And the European Union is very pleased to support this action here in the Pacific. Our vision is human-centric, and by this we mean that we want to ensure that technology works for the people and digital economies become fair and inclusive, so that people also in remote areas have access to digital means and digital skills. And we are very happy that the UNCDF shares this vision with us. Economy. A new on this area. Mainly focus on Samoa. And I really hope that the findings will prove to be useful and they will lead to improvement of digital competence among women, youth, rural communities, and also micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. The kind of users that do not benefit from necessarily from the best connections or the best equipment for this purpose. So I would like to also at the same time comment Samoa for their national strategy to ensure a coordinated approach to digital financial education. And as the Pacific region moves towards a digital future, I acknowledge the strong partnership between development partners in the region working in the sector. And I encourage stronger collaboration, joint ventures and partnerships to foster inclusive digital economies in the Pacific region. And in this context, I would like to also acknowledge the contribution of Australia and New Zealand, as already mentioned before, as contributors in this area. And last but not least, my sincere acknowledgement and thanks to UNCDF and the whole team for their efforts in making this happen and hosting this webinar today. And I wish all the participants very useful and fruitful discussions around this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind words and your remarks. We appreciate the partnership very much as well, because the demand side is of great importance, and having an understanding that we can measure across countries and even within different countries and different groups, I think is extremely important. And having the survey developed and ready to deploy even in other areas is very exciting for us as well. So I'd like to bring in, I can see that sometimes people are raising hands. Please feel free to put any questions for now in the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the very end of the presentations, but we'll go for the moment and we'll try to do some answering of questions as we go as well. For the moment, though, I would like to bring back Mr. Ali Akram, who is, again, he's instrumental in the Pacific in our UNCDF programs and has great experience, especially in terms of developing innovative digital solutions across Africa, across the Pacific, and across Asia. So I'm going to let him go ahead and give his presentation and be looking and seeing if there are any questions popping up in the meantime. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you for that, Jessica, and greetings to all those in the audience today, and special thanks to Dr. Askla from the EU for the opening remarks, along with our other donors, including DFAT and MFAT. Without their support and trust, our work in the Pacific would not be possible. So my name is Ali Akram. I'm the technical lead for UNCDF's program in the Pacific. And in sharing a context, I'll start by highlighting the significance of digital financial services in today's digital economy and its particular relevance to Pacific Island countries. And so from the slide, we can see that digital financial services, or DFS, are particularly significant for the Pacific, where island countries are geographically dispersed and with relatively small populations. DFS enables a broad range of financial services that can be accessed and delivered through digitally enabled channels, including mobile phones, agent networks, mobile apps, etc. Now, these channels provide increased accessibility, convenience, efficiency, especially in regions with remote populations and limited traditional banking infrastructure, as is the case in the Pacific. Yeah, can we have the next slide, please? And digital sorry, you're on the right slide. Yeah, thanks. And digital financial services have been a lifeline for billions of people, providing them access to basic financial services. Over the past decade, UNCDF's programs alone have helped over 2 million low-income Pacific Islanders gain access to financial services. And we worked very closely with regulators, banks, financial service providers, fintechs, startups, all players in the ecosystem to accelerate the development of innovative financial solutions, mobile banking, digital wallets, and payment systems. These services provide people safer ways to save and control their money, make and receive payments, and to access financial services that can result in poverty reduction, improved livelihoods, and economic growth. And particularly for rural communities, women, youth, MSMEs, and seasonal workers, along with other underserved communities. Yeah, can we have the next slide? Thanks. And looking at what digitization can offer to the region, the phenomenal change in digital financial inclusion has paved the way for the emergence of digital economies that create the opportunity for addressing persistent development challenges and contributing to at least 11 SDGs that span from ending poverty to climate change. Beyond basic financial inclusion, the digital payment platforms can enhance efficiency in transactions, promoting economic activity and growth. For example, emerging models in fintech startups are providing innovative solutions like micro-lending, micro-insurance, agri-tech, and rural financing, e-commerce, and remittance services. All of these that combine in and add to the national GDP and also provide financial resilience to the population. Yeah, the next slide, please. However, the focus of inclusive digital economies in the Pacific could remain unfulfilled due to low levels of digital literacy among the population. And these constrain their ability to fully leverage digital opportunities, which exacerbate the digital divide. Additionally, implementing targeted interventions has been specifically challenged by the lack of updated digital financial literacy data on which developmental efforts can be based and progress tracked. As a part of our development approach, UNCDF focuses on developing skills that provide consumers the ability and confidence to safely adopt and leverage digital services in their daily lives, thus empowering them. To address these gaps, UNCDF conducted the DFL survey in Samoa, along with 6 other Pacific countries, including Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu, Tonga, and Timor-Leste, to assess the current state of digital and financial literacy within each country, and to aid the sector as a whole in designing and implementing evidence-based interventions. We will hear more from the other panelists today, but I hope this presents some context to the motivation behind this effort from UNCDF. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. I think for time, we can keep going forward. There is a question, if you take a look in the question in the Q&A, that's specifically around the role of mobile money and thinking a little bit more about remittances that are done in cash and over the counter at the moment. So you may take a look at that, Ali, I think, specifically
Sure.
in the Q&A.
Thanks.
I just will point out quickly that to really underline what Ali is talking about, UNCDF, the DFL survey is part of a holistic approach. And so it's not a survey on its own, but it's part of a larger basket of offerings, basket of portfolio that provides both the products and services where you can practice and use digital and financial literacy skills that are developed, but also uses evidence such as in the DFL survey to be able to assess where people are right now. And I think that ties a bit into the idea of inward and outward remittances still being done over the counter in cash, and maybe what we can learn from the client side at the moment, why they may still be in that space. Now I would really like to welcome Ms. Kaz Tabut, who was absolutely instrumental in the implementation, development, and realization of the survey in all 7 of the island countries. She's the owner of Tabut Research, which is based in Australia, but has very deep expertise of over 30 years in the Pacific. And so I'm going to allow her now to talk a little bit more in depth about the survey itself and Samoa as a case. So welcome, Kaz. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Great. Okay, so I've really enjoyed the start of the session so far, but perhaps it's my opportunity to now share some of what we did and what we found before we move on to the other panelists. So the document that you're looking at the moment is the actual presentation report that was prepared for Samoa, for the Samoa case study. And before taking you through that, I just wanted to thank you again for inviting me to participate today. Obviously, I'm representative of a much larger team that worked on this study, and Tabut Research were actually partners in the project. So we helped refine the questionnaire, we did the data collection, we did the analysis and the reporting, but we also made a significant financial contribution to the study as well, to the series of studies across all of the countries. So we were delighted to do that as well, and we've done a lot of work in the digital financial literacy space for other projects as well. So first of all, in terms of the way the project was designed, it was designed to generate scores. So Yara, if you could please move to the next slide. The design was to develop 4 scores. So there was a score for digitalization, a score for financial competencies, a score for digital financial competencies, and an outcome-based measure. And then these were joined together to produce a total outcome score. Now, this score was developed on academic theory, and it was also allocated to groupings that you can see there on the right-hand side of the slide. So what we're going to see on the next slide is that all of the countries in this survey were in the moderate range. So Samoa is sitting there right in the middle of the 7 countries that this study was done in. Now, the whole idea of designing a score, which was done, as I said, on an academic basis, not by us, but by an expert in this field, was to allow for comparisons between countries, and that's what you're looking at here with the slide. So Samoa is in the darker blue, the navy blue. It also allows to get a comparison between different groups within a country so that you can look at, for example, women versus men, younger versus older, et cetera, and we'll see some of that in a moment. It also allows us to compare the results between waves. So any of the interventions or programs that are designed as a result of this study and other work that's being done in the sector in the region can be measured against this baseline in the future to see if the scores have improved. And finally, the other idea of having a score-based system was so that the Pacific or the Pacific region could compare its results to other regions in the world where this kind of work is being done. And I understand it's next going to be implemented in parts of Africa. So if we have a look at, as I said, this report, you can see the score, the total outcome score. You can see here the distribution from 0 right up to the top, and you can see there's very much a bunching in the middle. So the mean scores or the averages are probably a true reflection of the average result there. I think if we can go to the next slide, we'll see for looking just at Samoa. So we've got here on the left-hand side, if we could go back to the first slide, which is the total outcome slide. If we could just go back, one more back. Yes, that's it there. While we're waiting for the slide to come up, I'll explain to you that on these slides, we do have the scoring for the regional snapshot on one side of the slide, and then we have a closer look at the actual score for Samoa. So this is great. Thank you. In the green icons, you can see the areas where we saw higher outcome scores, and in the red, we see where we had lower outcome scores. So you can see there's a fairly bell-shaped curve in Samoa on the right-hand side there, and that those with the lower scores were people who were not currently working, who had only a middle school education, excuse me, who were lower income earners, and also those in the older age group. Whereas those with higher scores tended to be working in the public sector, working in a finance or technology sector, having a university education or higher income earners. I don't think there's any surprise there. If we could have a look now at the digitisation score, the next slide, you will see a similar pattern here, except that if you look on the left for the regional averages, you'll see some countries have a very high number of people with very low scores. And Samoa's actually done quite well here in terms of its position in the region. Again, we see the role of university education and working possibly in a public sector, so working in opportunity in a workspace where you may be using this type of technology. You can see there's some regional changes there as well in terms of who is doing better or not so well. If we could have a look at the next slide, please. So the second component of the score is the financial competencies. Here we see, while we saw on the slide before, that there's a lot of differences in the region in terms of digitisation. The financial competencies are fairly steady across the region. That's probably an area where there'll be some focus. And if we could look again at the next slide, which is the last one, which is really a measure of outcomes, and a lot of this is well-being focused, we can see again that some of these countries are very bunched in the middle. Fiji's quite ahead in this area, and a lot of this is to do with risk-based behaviour. I think it was interesting in the study that we looked at these scores, but we also took the opportunity to generate some information on general financial behaviour. And some of this actually became quite insightful. And if we have a look at just one more slide across, you can see here the type of work we looked at for Samoa. You can see on the bottom left there that the reality is Samoa is still largely a cash-based economy, and this is one of the larger challenges at the moment. We know that men are more likely than women to have a bank account, and the number of people with a digital wallet is only 1 in 4. If we go across to the next slide, we can also see in terms of the digital integration, just one more, thank you. We can see that smartphone ownership is very high, but you can see here again that it's interesting that 45% on an attitudinal measure believe that technology is leaving them behind. So there is a feeling that the pace is getting ahead of people. If we go to the next slide, we can also see a very key attitudinal measure to consider, which has already been mentioned by earlier speakers, that you know that the future is digital. In fact, some people, but more than half, almost half of people believe that this will soon replace cash in Samoa, but there's concern about the risk, and people do accept that there are positive and negative outcomes for this. I think the interesting thing from this study, that's all of the results that I'm going to share with you. Obviously, there's a very long, detailed report, but I will just mention briefly about the deployment of the survey. Obviously, in terms of our learnings, I'll just cover a couple of things based on what I've just presented to you. Probably the biggest issue for us when we started was the questionnaire. It was very complex. I understand it's now been simplified for other markets. It was quite academic in its tone, and it used a lot of language that wasn't readily understood by all of our respondents because the samples were national. And this included things like cryptocurrency, which is really not in the region, and things like that. And it also included some complex scenarios that sometimes people couldn't really understand in order to answer. But there was a lot of time spent fine-tuning the questionnaire, and I understand that in the future it is going to be in a simpler form, and we think that's a great progression. But we still did go into the field with something a little bit more complex than we would have liked, and this led to a longer time for field work. So that's a consideration. I think also it took a long time to get feedback from local coordinators. And in some markets, we didn't get any feedback at all. So that slowed progress a bit. I think in terms of the results, the scoring system is absolutely fantastic because of the comparisons it allows for. But perhaps it may want to be reconsidered in the future because it does weight certain behaviours at the same level. So, for example, in the digital activities, you get 1 point if you've set up an alarm or a reminder or an alert on your phone, but you also get only 1 point if you've written programming language or code. So I think the desire for a simple measure has possibly perhaps not allowed for some of the true diversity in digital literacy. But I think the advantage of the scoring system at the moment is because it's so simple, it could be reworked in the future, and it could also, you could rework it historically. It's very simple to follow. But I think overall, definitely this is the future. We saw with people, talking about, cash being replaced and so forth, and people do accept that they've got more control over saving money. However, as was mentioned in the opening remarks, there is recognition of the risk. I think I'd like to just leave you with, if it's at all possible, just some images of the fieldwork while we prepare for the next speaker. So, Oscar, how do I do this? Sorry, I've got someone from tech here helping me. If you could just share. I hope everybody can see that. That's our Samoa team. Obviously, one of the key learnings, using a local team. and deploying locally. This is some of our training happening in Samoa with our regional trainer. We have a full tablet-based system, so everything is scripted and programmed and very well controlled by our tech team, but spending a lot of time with the field team to be familiar with the instruments and familiar with the questionnaire. So there's some lovely, happy, smiling faces from our great team that worked on the study. And this is some of them out in the field, feeling very proud to be involved in the study, and they were very well received in the communities they went to. Obviously very COVID sensitive in many locations as well. And this is just the lovely images I'd like to leave you with. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the images at the end. Sorry that I'm fuzzy. The sun has just come up here on the equator. But I think one of the things that we really appreciated with the survey implementation, and especially afterwards, is the input on being able to simplify it and bring it into other markets and other contexts, and the overview that you had on what we could do better in the future. But it is, I think, as you said, a very strong tool. And another thing that's very much appreciated is the focus on financial well-being and on behavioral snapshots rather than just looking at knowledge or skills that people have. Because even today, even though we know that a behavioral focus is important for any kind of digital and financial literacy program, that isn't always represented in the research or in the reporting that we have afterwards, so that these findings can be applied. People who are interested will be able to share the links, I think, after to the reports which have the surveys, as well as my contact information, and anyone for anyone who would be interested to, I think, learn a bit more about the tool. But let's continue. So thank you very much. I'm looking at the chat, but when there's questions at the end, I'll be able to point those out as well. For timing, though, I'd like to bring in Ms. Zaituna Mustafa Abdi, our colleague in Samoa, who's the country coordinator, and she has quite a bit of experience in both the Pacific, in parts of Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa, around digital financial services, both on the side of research and on the side of working within the private sector. So she brings a very interesting, I think, and varied background to our discussion today. So Zaituna, I'm going to give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, talofa lava, from wherever you're joining us from. This presentation has a two-prong. I'll speak first, and then I'll invite my colleague from the Central Bank of Samoa to give a glimpse of what they are currently doing with regards digital and financial literacy. But before I start, the picture you have in front of you is a wooden bus. So even if this is a virtual session, I want you to imagine boarding one of Samoa's iconic wooden buses, vibrant and colorful, ready to take you on a journey through beautiful Samoa. That's what we call it back here. Today, I invite you to join me on this bus ride as we explore the findings of digital and financial literacy for Samoa, but a bit also on where we've come from, where we are heading, and some of them maybe a glimpse of what the private sector, government bodies, CSOs, NGOs in Samoa and beyond can do to make Samoa a digitally inclusive nation. So as we travel together, my role and that of Lana is to take you through our journey, where we've come from, as I've said, our vision in regards to financial inclusion and digital and financial literacy. So in the first slide, without repeating what Ms. Kaza has already highlighted on, I think for me it's to just let you know that this survey was actually covering, at that time, the population of Samoa was about, adult population was about 127,000, and we covered about 10% of that. So it's largely representative. That being said, ensuring that the findings reflect the diverse experiences and perspective across the country. This is also what we see every day as we live and interact with these individuals. This extensive data also allows us to use it accurately for our, decision making and programmatic interventions. In the next slide, the survey also developed the four frameworks that Kaz spoke about. So for Samoa, I think what has been found out is actually representative of what we see in the country in terms of when we are doing our programming and interventions. So, for example, digitalization, which assesses access to digital services, internet usage, online activities, and safe digital practices. Samoa scored about 7 points from 18 points. Financial competency, which evaluates budgeting, savings behaviors, and basic knowledge, we scored about 6.87 out of 13. And then digital finance competency, which looks at behaviors, beliefs around digital financial services and online financial safety, we scored about, combined with DFS outcomes, score about 8.59. So you can just clearly see in totality, while we've actually been a moderate country in terms of our digital and financial literacy. That being said, it has given us a baseline to be able to now design the right initiatives, the right interventions, which Lana and I will speak through in the later part of the presentation. But if you move to the next slide, because this has already been highlighted a lot by Kaz, is in terms of challenges, I think I wanted to cover just 4, because they were really salient to me, and it's actually what we see. One was quality and cost of data services. So if you have read this report, Samoa actually has a 79% smartphone penetration, and internet is quite, there are people who are using internet, which is interesting. However, quality and costs came out really as a remain significant barrier, as a challenge to effective internet access. And just if I take a step back, we talk about internet and cost of internet as one of the maybe prerequisites or building blocks of, accessing, digital financial services. Not all digital financial services run on an offline mode. So if you want to have a super app, which I can see some colleagues of ours from Vodafone and Digicel here, you need an internet service that's affordable, but also has quality, that it doesn't buffer for long. A second is limited participation in online activities. Of course, if I triangulate this back to the first point, you can see it's because you really don't want to spend much of your tala on the internet. You'd rather carry that cash or withdraw all the bulk and go to the supermarket, buy some groceries, go to the, if you go for dinner, pay within the restaurant and so on. Then this really relates to the third point again, which is Samoa is heavily a cash-based economy. Almost 96% of Samoans pay for their groceries. I mean, even myself, I can tell you for free. Back at home in Kenya, I did not used to handle cash at all. M-Pesa was my way of life. And that is not anymore. For the last 2 years, almost 18 months I've been in Samoa. I do sometimes pay with cash. Having said that, I mean, there is so much to be done and to reflect on, and I'm sure Lana, while she is reflecting on her point, she'll also let us know is that we had to be deliberate on what to do at a macro level, at a meso level, and at a micro level. So DFL today touches on the micro. But what can private sector do? That the Vodafones and the banks, you know, that's at meso level. And then at macro, what are the policies that drive us? So we will also share with you some of the things that we've done. Just in the same time we were launching this research, we were also launching a national document, a national strategy, which is the National Financial Inclusion Strategy 2.0, which highlights comprehensively the journey we want to take towards a digitally inclusive Samoa. And DFL is actually one of the strategic pillars, the pillar number 5. So you can see that there is actually an intent for us to reach that. Lastly, 45% of Samoans feel technology is leaving them behind. I mean, we talk about, you know, people that are often left behind. But if 45%, almost half of Samoans feel that there is a problem, there is policy, you know, DFL interventions, nationwide interventions that need to go through for us to be able to address that. And lastly, the survey also indicates that there is, and this is, I think, really intriguing for me, because we always sort of talk about trust in DFS. I mean, I think I've had that word trust even back in 2007 when M-Pesa, you know, came on board as the first mobile money product. Up to now, we're talking about how many years? 15 almost. So my mathematics is not giving me justice, but we're still talking about trust. So the survey actually found out that lagging trust in digital financial tools and personal confidence of using DFS is a detriment to the citizens. And it's, I mean, this is representative. So one of the findings there that was spoken about was 2/3 of Samoan adults, about 66%, believe DFS is risky for ordinary people. I mean, it's okay to have such a fear, and I understand, but you know, it's about now at meso level, at you know, development partners and central bank and other ministries to be able to come up with the right tools to be able to at least even reduce that percentage. And we will tell you some of the things that we are doing. I won't take the show from Lana, but there is a slide that I have on recommendations. What do we want to see, especially with just looking at the attendees on this webinar? What are some of the things we can be able to do? One is diversifying digital financial services. I must say right now, if we look every quarter as the National Financial Inclusion Task Force, we look at data that comes from the supply side. Supply side meaning our financial institutions and digital financial institutions. And most of it is always person-to-person payments, a bit of cross-border payment, cross-border transfers, and just bill payments. However, DFS moves beyond that. We used to call it a digital heaven. So the journey to digital heaven does not stop at bill payments. Those are called remote services. So you sort of have to now start going into that staircase of digital heaven in terms of embedding now bundled products, insurance, end-to-end, you know, even doing an insurtech products or mobile nano loans, which are end-to-end assessed digitally from automation, remoteness, and all that. I mean, digital savings. So one of our meetings a few weeks ago, we actually had a thematic discussion around digital credits and the successes and also the challenges or the concerns around digital credit from the East African perspective. Second is digitizing public services. And this is really passionate to me because when you look at viability of mobile money business in the Pacific, I mean, what baseline are what base are you talking about? The population will not grow overnight. So we have to be realistic about that. However, there is, how many counts or how many services can you be able to ensure that you digitize for one customer? So I'll take an example. One customer, Moana. Moana is my favorite name here in Samoa. Moana can do about 10 diversified digital financial service transactions. So bill payment, she can pay school fees, she can buy groceries, she went to dinner. Just look at the journey of an individual in a day or in a month. And how do you diversify that? That's still nascent in Samoa. So we see a lot of opportunities, a lot of untapped market. So that's two. In terms of diversification of public services, we are also saying that government public service delivery, we are already hearing of digital public infrastructure or public service delivery. Some ministries in I think in the Western world, but also in the African region, my country, for example, now the Minister of ICT is also the Minister of Digital Economy. So you will start seeing a lot of that. And I think there is roadmap around that even for Samoa, because in the digital transformation strategy that is with the cabinet currently, we one of the recommendations is to form a digital transformation unit within the ICT. That is intent, and I think it's something to still commend the government for. However, bringing in public service, P2G, person to government payments, low ticket size, micro transactions on the digital platforms as we start, digitizing up to tax payments eventually. I think in terms of service providers and regulators, if any regulatory barriers are there that can be able to support the digital financial service ecosystem, that's also a recommendation. In terms of, I think mobile wallets, you can only understand the mobile wallets and the use cases and get the trust and competence if you use it regularly. If you use it once in 3 months when your daughter sends you money, I think, even they will forget even their passwords. So I understand even some of the, findings that the research brought about. I think that's in terms of Samoa, but I also just wanted to triangulate, not only focusing on Samoa, but just look at the Pacific. What did our data say? So I collected, in the next slide, you will see that I collected a bit of data in terms of what the regional DFS adoption looks like. So I'll pause for a minute because this is interesting. I mean, if you look at this slide, I've put Fiji there, not by default, not by, it might be by default, by the way. Samoa is actually number 4 there, but it was only to just show you that on all the 7 countries, current account adoption ranged between 36% to 62%. Even Fiji, that is our, that has really progressed in the, banking, but mostly on mobile money, you will see some interesting things. Now, I went ahead and also did a bit of a summary on DFS adoption. Our research shows that the 7 countries range between 4% to 78%. 78%, I'm sure you understand the usual suspect. That's actually Fiji. The reason for that, maybe our colleagues here in this in this webinar already know, there was a lot of driving that UNCDF did. Actually, M-PESA was funding from UNCDF back in the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program. Back in COVID-19, the government was deliberate about digitizing the public transport and the payments thereof. So you can clearly see how public service delivery can be a testament into that. You will also notice that some of our countries are still really have really low adoption of DFS. Solomon Islands is 4%, but I'll explain to you why for that. But yeah, we still have like Tonga here, we have Vanuatu, some few very low numbers. That our colleagues there are really working hard and diligently to ensure that they can strengthen the ecosystem at a market development perspective. But for Solomon Islands, just to touch on that, if you didn't know, UNCDF supported Solomon Islands to actually launch the first mobile money. So Solomon Islands is, I think, the new kid on the block with regards to launching mobile money back in 2023. So that's in terms of, the regional DFS adoption, comparing the 7 countries that we did this research, but also just triangulated a few of how the, digital and financial literacy has really ensured a global and some good case studies that we have from UNCDF and our colleagues in Bangladesh, our colleagues in Tanzania, our colleagues in Rwanda, and Fiji again, is here because if you remember, there was a Fiji financial education program. How you can be able to use financial education by engraving it into our children from primary school and secondary school. Just look at those numbers; they are excellent. The program reached about 910 schools. 735 were primary schools. So these are children between 7 to 12 years, and then secondary school as well. 40% of those being women. In Tanzania, this was for refugees. There was a really interesting capability program and rural population. In Rwanda, there was also something around refugee program that my colleague Jessica, who's also the moderator here, has worked on. And in Bangladesh, there was also something around MSMEs and how to strengthen the financial and digital capability within the MSMEs. I leave with that, but I invite my colleague who will give you real life stories and what the central bank is playing as the lead implementer of the National Financial Inclusion Strategy and also the owner of this document that we present today. Over to you, moderator, to invite Lana. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaituna. That really puts a spotlight, I think, on the case of Samoa, and it's interesting to see how different the countries are in the region in a snapshot like that. And we have some interesting questions in the chat as well. I'll hold off so that I can welcome Mrs. Lana Lome Remia, who is the manager of the Financial System Development at the Central Bank of Samoa. And she's been in leadership at the central bank for over 15 years and a very key partner of UNCDF, as Zaituna has mentioned, in strengthening digital and financial literacy and building inclusive digital economies in the Pacific. So I won't have any further ado. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Before I get on to my brief talking points, I'd just like to acknowledge the support by the donors, development partners, and also UNCDF for this work that was brought to Samoa and the Pacific. It is very important and a very important initiative, especially as the world continues to pivot towards digital. For us, specifically for Samoa, it is the first of its kind, and I understand it's the same for the Pacific as well. So this is very important in terms of establishing a baseline. And also, as you would have heard, in terms of what was delivered in the different facets of the survey results, it really does give a good profile of the situation and also the reasons around, why the situation is it is as is. So for Samoa, so it is a very important survey to have been conducted, and we're very grateful that Samoa was part of this initiative. And the results are quite interesting and something that we really need, especially as at that time, we were developing our second National Financial Inclusion Strategy. So for us, we were quite happy that we were able to launch together the National Financial Inclusion Strategy 2.0 for Samoa, and also co-hosted the launch for this report. And it was such a very timely, because then we will be able to implement the NFIS2 with solid data in terms of the space in digital and financial literacy. So how the central bank is utilizing the findings for DFLS to improve digital and financial literacy. So now that we've rolled out NFIS 2.0, the results of the survey does provide a good foundation for a lot of the strategic pillars that are in NFIS 2.0. But it does speak more directly to two specifically. There's one on, well, actually a couple more than two. So we have a specific focus on products and channels. We also have a strategic pillar on the DFS ecosystem, but also one on financial capability. So a lot of what was that came out of the survey really does help to inform these different strategic pillars and also the activities that are planned to be conducted for the life of NFIS 2.0. So and one of the working arrangements that we do have in this second strategy, we now have technical working groups, so more focused to take forward these strategic pillars. And so the work, the results provide another good guide for us to be more strategic in our thinking of the areas that we need to target more. And also in terms of products for the service providers, it does help provide more guidance in terms of, you know, how they could better place their product or what things they need to consider in terms of designing their products. So as I said earlier, having the survey and the results at that particular juncture in our journey in financial inclusion, it really does provide a strong support for the work to take forward. And we do know there's plans to have this survey conducted in the future. So again, it's something that we look forward to in terms of finding out, you know, how we fared in between the two surveys. And hopefully that will provide another gauge as to, you know, of the efforts that we have put into the financial inclusion and financial literacy space. So in a nutshell, the survey really does provide that strong support in terms of the data that the work really does need in terms of driving forward financial inclusion for Samoa. Really, that's what I had in mind to convey. And again, I appreciate the support for this work that was afforded for Samoa, and happy to take any questions later on in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. I think if it's all right, we can take about 5 minutes for questions. We have a few questions in the chat. And so I'd like to point out just a couple of them. Around the survey specifically, I think maybe Kaz, that you might be best placed for this one. But there's a question that says, were there also questions on if a respondent faced scams or frauds, what was their journey afterwards? Did they have access to complaint resolution channels? Did they lose trust in DFS and shut down other digital interfaces they have? I believe we did not have any questions, given that this was more of a quantitative, but I think that is something that we've been thinking about for other programs as well in terms of qualitative data. Do you have anything that you could add there?
There were some measures in the questionnaire that were scenario based. So there were some, like, you know, if you were, for example, you know, Mary has gone on to her thing and she's found, you know, there's scenarios like if you've had a password compromised or something like that, what do you do? So there were some behavioural questions. And there were also some, as we talked before, about the well-being component. So we had questions like, things like trusting financial service providers, which has been discussed, but worrying about scams and fraud, finding it easier to manage money, whether people have been locked out of their phones or devices or not. So there were a range of other measures in the questionnaire. We just kept to the key ones today, but yes, there were some scenario-based items.
And the full survey is available online. I'm not sure if it was in the invitation, but I think that we can provide it. I'll find it and put it in the chat in just a minute with the link. Thank you, Kaz.
I think, yes, and the full report, I believe the questionnaire is in the back of that. So
It
in the
is.
full report, you'll be able to see the actual questions.
Thank you very much. So I think one of the questions that we have here that maybe Zaituna and Lana, you might be best placed to answer, is about Samoans and the perception of scams and fraud. Where do they get this perception? I can venture a guess, but you'll know more specifically. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
So maybe Lana can, add or complement this. But just looking at the survey, so they say 22% say that they lost money because of online scam and phishing attacks, and this is on their savings account mostly. One other thing is the majority will not trust automated services such as app or robo-advisor. So maybe that's more of perception. In addition, Samoans have grown increasingly wary of financial scams and fraud, not limited to DFS. So this, yeah, definitely that's one disclaimer. And then outcomes associated with DFS includes potential savings or exposure to fraud or phishing scams. So maybe if Lana has any one message, particular message, maybe that comes in Samoan, she can be able to share. Yeah, happy to hear that.
Hi, I think that one that question you covered it well, because it is based on the situation around that time when the respondents provided the answer and when the survey was conducted. So it may well also be there was a big spike in scams at that time, because it does sort of happens at times. It's not always the case. Scams and these fraud cases, they sort of pop up, and then they become something that the regulators send out alerts on. So that's happened in the past, where we've had to issue advice, general advice to the public around being careful. Scams and fraud is sort of like making a round, and so I can only guess at at the situation at the time when this was taken out for the respondents as well. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that gives a little bit more color to where the perception comes from. And I think it's that's a fairly common experience people are having and perception that's being built globally. So in the Pacific and really everywhere that more digitalization is coming in, there's more chance for fraud, more perception of fraud because people are experiencing it. And because you're calling it out at the bank. And so Ali, there's a couple of questions that kind of go together. There's one specifically on the way forward for Samoa and digitalization, but also kind of one that's more broad around mobile money in the Pacific and moving it forward. So both of these are forward looking, and I think that they correspond a bit to some of the things that you brought up in your presentation. If you want to summarize a little bit about the way forward.
So on my presentation, I think I would also ask some reflection on the slide that Zaituna shared, which gave a comparison of different countries and the uptake of digital financial services as opposed to traditional banking services that are available, where Fiji we could see has a high uptake and other countries are to follow. We strongly believe that digital is the way forward, and that is how the markets will evolve and continue to evolve at their own different pace. And to help and accelerate that development, we work across the landscape, right, with the regulators, ensuring there's a policy landscape that does support such innovations, working with the providers themselves, and then working on the demand side with the potential customers across the different segments, may those be women, MSMEs, and helping providers build specific use cases that do resonate and fill the needs that do exist. Again, we see Fiji in the lead, but Solomon Islands, Zatuna called it the new kid to the block, where the launch of DFS services within the last 6 to 8 months, we're seeing approximately 50,000 registrations having taken place. So there definitely is an appetite for such services, and these markets will continue to mature, as do the service providers, and they do build up those services that are needed and their connectivity. Currently, UNCDF is working with at least 3 service providers across 5 countries, either helping them develop new products or helping them strengthen their agent network, the overall value proposition. And that also speaks, I think, to the second part of the question on remittances and the shift from OTC, over the counter or cash, to digital. UNCDF supported Vodafone launch the first corridor inter-country cross-border remittance between Vanuatu and Fiji. And now we see, even after our support has ended, additional corridors are being added on, and which is exactly what we want to see, right? Where we as development sector partners come in, help de-risk, help develop those platforms, and then the commercial viability expands the outreach of such services. And the shift itself, I think it's pretty straightforward. The value proposition has to be there. If it makes sense, people will adopt beyond the awareness and the digital financial literacy skills that they require. The providers do need to ensure that there is adequate value proposition that they're creating for this change in habit that we want to see in the market. Now, that value proposition could be a cost factor, less costs than what OTC costs look like. It could be convenience, it could be the time it takes for these transactions to take place, and most importantly, the additional services, the value-added services that are bundled onto remittance services. Then what does that look like, and how do markets and providers continue to evolve is something that UNCDF will continue to support. But around remittances, I think our next focus area would be on looking at regional harmonization of policies, and how can we at a macro level also support, now that there are some service providers offering these services, and how do we further encourage harmonization across countries and policies and regulations to remove additional burdens or bottlenecks that might be there. Thanks. Hope that answered it.
I think so, but Zaituna or Alana, if you'd like to add anything. He brought you in as well. If not, Lana particularly, I think this kind of leads in from Ali's answer and from the previous question, but it's specifically around laws concerning digitalization in Samoa. If you wanted to underline any laws that are currently existing, any regulations or policy or anything that's going to be developed or redone, reinvented.
Well, I can only come in from the from our space, from the financial services, the financial sector space. And I can confirm that there's already work more in the payment space that's already underway for For instance, one of the new mandates to the Central Bank of Samoa includes overseeing the national payment system. And so from there, there's a lot of aspects in the digitalization space. So looking at measures to protect and secure the flow of these funds, but also looking at different types of instruments for the market to take out. So of course there are standards that we will be looking at, as part of the work and policies. So there is a lot of work that's in the pipeline for that particular work stream in the payments area, and specifically in going forward with in the digital space.
Thank you very much. I think it's fine to answer from the perspective of the financial sector. And what I'd like to do now is say a thank you again to all of our panelists and to our special speaker, Dr. Askola, and acknowledge once again the partnerships that we had within Samoa, the work of Tebut, the work of Adele Atkinson, who is the original author of the survey, Dr. Adele Atkinson at the University of Birmingham, and of course the European Union, OACPS, New Zealand, and the government of Australia for all of the support that we got along the way. I realize we haven't been able to answer every question that came up in the chat, but we're going at about 20 minutes over right now. So what we are discussing is follow up afterwards. I've put my own email address into the chat for anything specific, especially around the survey and DFL work. Otherwise, I can see that some of our panelists are answering in the Q&A as well. But I think what we'll do is we will have a blog follow-up, partially around specific questions for the Pacific, but there's a definite trend around data protection, around consumer protection, around fraud, and this is not surprising at all. But it is interesting that this is coming out quite a bit in the chat right now. So with no other words, I just would like to wrap this up and to say thank you to everybody who attended as well. We greatly appreciate your participation. And we're going to have more webinars around these topics in the future, but we hope that you were able to learn a little bit more about Samoa, about the survey, and especially around UNCDF's approach to DFL. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening over there. Afternoon, day, if you're somewhere else. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.